what we call a movement is really a euphemism. And if you're talking about that movement among us that took place, say, from the mid-50s through the mid-70s, or wherever people draw the chronological parameters, was comprised of a lot of different elements. And they went from people whose entree to the movement was moral conscience, to people who felt the injustices we experienced were intentional, were insidiously being reproduced, and by an enemy that had our destruction at the heart of its agenda, and that therefore we ought to not just prod it, but challenge it in a fundamental way.
Growing up in the 60s, I think, made me become an activist. And a lot of that I don't think I realized when it was happening. I don't think I was, for instance, conscious in 1963, when I was 13 years old, how much I was internalizing the civil rights struggle. We saw it in the newspaper. We might have heard adults talking about it. We saw it on television, but we were not a part of that, directly involved in it. And yet we knew the things that were going on. So we knew, for instance, about the murder of Medgar Evers. We knew about the March on Washington. We knew about the bombing of a church in Birmingham. And we knew that young people our age died in a church on a Sunday morning.
I can remember reading about the, quote, black student movement of the 60s and 70s. And I remember reading a book that described how that initial effort got started in Greensboro, that it was in a dormitory one night where a group of, and I forget the number, but it could have been 8 or 9 young men were sitting in a dormitory room complaining, as we are wont to do, about all the many ills in the society. And I don't know if it was the quality of the discussion or the quality of their refreshments, but somewhere near the end of that session, somebody decided that that's enough, that it's not enough to sit around and talk about this, we have to do something. Now that resulted in the next morning, 2 or 3 of those people who had been in that discussion going into town and deciding that they were going to sit at the lunch counter. And that model, quickly, like wildfire, as it got to be reported around the country, stimulated other such instances. Until 3 or 4 years later, you not only had people in a small southern black school sitting in at a lunch counter in town, but you had graduate students taking over buildings armed.